It began as just a simple wedding picture until the moment someone closely studied the bride's hand and uncovered a grim secret. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of the Atlanta Historical Archive, while Dr. Rebecca Morrison carefully checked early 20th century photographs given by a secret donor. Among old portraits and formal group shots, one image immediately caught her attention, a wedding photo from 1903. A white man in a dark suit sat stiffly next to a black woman in a rich white wedding dress. Their hands were joined between them, a supposed sign of partnership. Rebecca's 15 years as a history keeper had taught her to spot what didn't fit. This photo looked deeply wrong in several ways. In Georgia, in 1903, black and white people marrying was not only considered shameful, it was against the law. The state's anti-mixing laws, in place since 1750 and made tougher after the Civil War, made such unions crimes punishable by jail time. Yet here was a picture showing exactly that. She marked the photo for a detailed digital scan, unable to shake the worrying feeling that held her. 2 weeks later, while looking at the digital files, Rebecca slowly zoomed in on different parts: the studio background, the woman's jewelry, the man's serious face. Then she focused on their connected hands. As she made the image larger, she felt a sudden dread. The bride's fingers were not simply resting, they were purposefully set in a help signal, her thumb and pointer finger forming a small but clear sign of distress. Rebecca's hands shook as she zoomed in more. The woman's fingers were placed with clear intent, hidden within what looked like a married pose, but actually crying out for rescue. This wasn't just an unlawful marriage, it was proof of something much darker. A silent cry had been frozen in time for 120 years, waiting for someone to finally notice and grasp its meaning. Rebecca immediately called Dr. Marcus Williams, a specialist in Black history and the Jim Crow era. When he came to her office that evening, she showed him the photograph without explaining. Marcus looked at it quietly, his face growing more and more troubled. "This shouldn't exist," he finally said. "Georgia's laws in 1903 made this impossible. Unless what?" Rebecca asked, though she already feared the answer. Marcus leaned back, his face hard. "Unless this was never a real legal marriage. Unless this picture shows something else entirely. Force, imprisonment, or worse. Look at her face, that's not a look of a bride. That's fear barely held back." They spent hours examining every detail. The studio stamp read, "Morrison and Wright Portrait Studio, Atlanta, Georgia, August 1903. A faint note on the back simply said, "Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant." Not wife, not bride, servant. The word felt heavy between them. "He didn't even try to hide what she was to him," Marcus said quietly. "This photograph was never meant to record a marriage. It was meant to record ownership." Rebecca felt sick. But why the wedding dress? Why stage it this way? Marcus pulled up old records on his computer. Control, shame. Some white men during this time used their power over black women in truly awful ways. They couldn't legally marry them, but they could still force them into situations that mocked a marriage. A cruel joke that met their desires while keeping their high social position. The woman had no rights, no protection, no escape. That night, Rebecca couldn't sleep. She kept seeing the woman's face, her carefully placed fingers, the silent cry that had traveled over a century. Who was she? What happened to her? And most upsetting of all, did anyone see her signal back then, or had it remained unseen until this moment? Too late to save her. The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus started their search at the Georgia State Archives. They needed to find the names of both people in the photograph. The name Charles Whitfield was their starting point. The archive keeper, an older black woman named Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who had worked there for 35 years, clearly tensed up when she heard the name. "Charles Whitfield," she repeated slowly. "That's a name that still matters in certain groups, though not for anything to be proud of." She went into the records room and came back with several boxes. The Whitfield family was well known in Atlanta from the 1870s through the 1920s. They made their wealth in cotton and fabric after the war. Charles Whitfield took over the family business in 1898. The 1900 census showed Charles Whitfield, age 28, living in a large house with much money and many servants listed. Rebecca felt her stomach clench as she read the names. All black women and girls, ages from 14 to 30. One entry stood out: Louisa, age 16, domestic servant, can read and write. Marcus found property records showing Whitfield owned several buildings around Atlanta, including a fabric factory where he employed many workers, mostly black women and children working in terrible conditions for very little money. Newspaper stories from the time praised him as a forward-thinking employer and a leader in the community. The difference between his public image and what they were finding was sickening. They searched for more about the woman in the photograph. She was listed only as servant instead of by name on the photo note. Finding her true identity would be hard. But Mrs. Hayes had an idea. If this picture was taken in August 1903, check the city records for reports of missing persons or strange events around that time. Sometimes families tried to report their daughters missing, even if the police rarely acted. After 2 days of looking through broken records, Marcus found a police report from September 1903. It was short and dismissive, but it gave the first real clue. Report filed by Henry and Martha Johnson regarding their daughter, Louisa Johnson, age 19, working in the household of Charles Whitfield. Family says she has not been seen in over a month despite living just 2 miles away. Mr. Whitfield states Miss Johnson is performing her duties as agreed and is healthy. No proof of wrongdoing, case closed. Rebecca checked the name against the 1900 census. There she was, Louisa Johnson, age 16 in 1900, living with her parents and 3 younger siblings in a simple home near Auburn Avenue. Her father, Henry, worked as a carpenter. Her mother, Martha, as a clothes cleaner. The family could read and write and owned their small house. They were part of Atlanta, striving black middle class, trying to build a life despite the heavy pressure of Jim Crow. Marcus found more records. In 1902, Henry Johnson had been hurt in a construction accident and could no longer work. The family fell into debt. A note in a local church's charity records showed they had asked for help in early 1903. "This is how it happened," Marcus said, his voice heavy with sadness and anger. Whitfield saw a chance. A family in desperate need, a young woman with no alternatives. He offered work, probably promised good wages, and then they found a letter in the church records written by Martha Johnson to the pastor in July 1903. "We have not seen our Louisa in 3 weeks. Mr. Whitfield says she is well and working hard, but he will not let us visit her. He says it would mess up the house schedule. Reverend, my heart tells me something is wrong. My daughter writes to us every week without fail, but we have received no letters. When I went to his house, the servants would not look at me. Please, can you help us?" The pastor's answer was noted in his journal. "Spoke with Mr. Whitfield about the Johnson girl. He promised me she is healthy and happy, just busy with her duties. He complained about the family's worries and suggested they are not thankful for his kindness in hiring her. I tend to believe him. The Johnsons must trust in God and not cause trouble for a respected gentleman who has shown them Christian charity." Rebecca tracked down the records for the Morrison and Wright Portrait Studio through the Georgia Historical Society. The studio had operated from 1895 to 1910, and amazingly, some materials had been kept by the photographer's family. She called James Morrison, the great-grandson of William Morrison, the studio's founder. James invited them to his house, where he kept a large collection of his great-grandfather's work. William Morrison photographed Atlanta society for 15 years, James explained, leading them to his office. He kept detailed diaries about his clients and his jobs. He was also quietly the son of a man against slavery and struggled with taking pictures of the uglier parts of Southern life. He pulled out a leather journal from August 1903. "I've read through all of these over the years. Some entries stayed with me. This is one of them." He opened to a page marked with an old ribbon and began reading. August 17th, 1903. "Today, I did perhaps the most upsetting job of my career. Charles Whitfield asked for a wedding portrait, but there was no wedding. The young Negro woman he brought to the studio was clearly not there willingly. She wore an expensive dress that didn't fit right, and her eyes held such deep fear that I nearly refused the job." The entry continued. Whitfield insisted on posing them as a married couple with their hands joined. The woman, he never used her name, only called her girl, started shaking when he grabbed her hand. I saw bruises on her wrists as I placed them for the photograph. When I looked into her eyes to make sure she was facing the camera correctly, I saw desperation there. She was trying to tell me something, but with Whitfield watching her every move, she couldn't speak. James turned the page, his voice becoming unsteady. As I got the camera ready, I noticed her fingers moving slightly, repositioning themselves into what looked like a planned pattern, a signal, perhaps. I said nothing, but I made sure to capture it clearly. I took 3 shots. Whitfield wanted to be sure he got a perfect image. After they left, I felt physically ill. I knew what I had photographed wasn't a wedding, it was proof of something criminal. But what could I do? Report it to the police? They would laugh at me for suggesting a white man of Whitfield's standing had done anything wrong. Marcus made the search wider to look at Whitfield's past more fully. What they found was a history of misuse that went back years. Through court files, property papers, and old newspapers, a troubling picture appeared. Between 1899 and 1905, at least 6 families had complained about daughters who had gone to work for Whitfield and then lost contact with their families. Each case followed a similar path. A black family facing money trouble, a young woman, usually between 16 and 20, hired as house help, initial letters home that suddenly stopped, family members turned away when they tried to visit, police reports filed and quickly closed. In 2C, Aces, the young women finally came back months later, refusing to talk about what happened, their spirits visibly damaged. Rebecca found a statement from a woman named Sarah, who had worked for Whitfield in 1901. She had given her story to a black community group about the abuses by white employers, a record that existed outside official systems because official systems refused to hear such complaints. Mr. Whitfield kept 3 of us in the house, Sarah stated. We were never allowed to leave. He told us if we tried, he would have our families arrested for stealing, or our fathers killed by a mob. He did whatever he wanted to us. We were his property in every way but name. The statement continued. There was a girl there when I arrived. Couldn't have been more than 16. She was in a room on the 3rd floor and we weren't allowed to speak to her. I heard her crying at night. After a few weeks she was gone. Mr. Whitfield said she had stolen from him and run away, but I knew better. She wouldn't have left. She was too afraid of what he would do to her family. I got out because my brother threatened to make noise to go to the newspapers. Whitfield let me go rather than risk attention, but I know others weren't so lucky. Marcus found records showing that Whitfield had connections to local police and city officials. He regularly gave money to political campaigns and held social gatherings for Atlanta's wealthy. He had full protection, Marcus said with bitterness. The system guarded him, the police worked for him, the courts respected him, and black families had absolutely no way to fight back. Their daughters could be taken, hurt, even murdered, and there was nothing they could do. Despite the terrible things they were uncovering, Rebecca stayed focused on Louisa herself. The photograph showed more than a person being harmed. It showed resistance. The hand signal C, ought forever in that image, was an act of defiance, a refusal to let her capture go unseen. She knew, Rebecca said, looking at the photograph again. She knew that picture might be the only proof, so she left a message. Through Martha Johnson's letters to different groups and churches, they followed the family's desperate efforts to find their daughter. In October 1903, Henry Johnson, despite his injuries, tried to force his way into Whitfield's house. He was arrested for entering private property without permission and causing a scene, spending 2 weeks in jail. The event made the newspapers, but the stories were entirely supportive of Whitfield, important businessman harassed by confused former employee's relative. Martha wrote to the newly formed Atlanta chapter of the NAACP in December 1903, "My daughter is being held against her will by Charles Whitfield. She came to his home as a worker and is now his prisoner. I have not seen her in 4 months. She would never leave her family on her own. Please, someone must help us. We have tried every legal way, and no one will listen because we are Negro and he is white and wealthy." The NAACP responded, but their investigation hit the same barriers. Their lawyer, a black man named Robert Foster, tried to get a court order to free her. The judge refused to issue it, saying there was no evidence of illegal holding and suggesting the Johnson family was making wild claims against a respected member of society to try and get money. Foster wrote down the case details but couldn't go further without risking his own safety and career. Then Marcus found something unexpected, a letter dated December 1903 from a white woman named Eleanor Hartwell, who was Whitfield's neighbor. She wrote to her sister in Boston, "There is something deeply troubling happening next door. Charles Whitfield has a young Negro woman in his house to breach. He claims, is a servant. The situation seems much darker. I have only seen her once looking out from an upstairs window. Her face was bruised. I tried to speak with her when Charles was away, but the other servants refused to let me in, clearly scared. I am thinking of reporting this to someone, but I fear no one will believe me or care." The trail of Louisa's story grew cold after December 1903, and Rebecca feared the worst. But then Marcus found something in an unlikely place, the records of the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C. in March 1904. A woman named Louisa was admitted with severe injuries, brought in by members of a black aid group who had found her near the train station. The hospital records were brief but telling. Female patient, about 20 years old, gave name as Louisa but refused last name. Many injuries in different stages of healing, including broken ribs, cuts, and signs of long-term physical abuse. Patient extremely disturbed and barely speaks, shows deep fear of men, especially white men. Patient has hinted she ran away from somewhere in Georgia, but will not give details, stating, "He will kill my family if I tell." Rebecca's heart pounded as she read on. The hospital had contacted a local group that helped women who had escaped from slavery's lasting effects and from abusive situations. A social worker named Catherine Wells took charge of Louisa's case. Her notes gave more background. "This young woman has been through unimaginable suffering. She jumps at sudden movements and has nightmares that wake the whole ward. Over several weeks, she has slowly shared parts of her story. Forced capture, repeated attacks, being kept away from her family, and constant threats against her loved ones if she tried to leave." Catherine's notes from April 1904 recorded Louisa's words, "I was trapped in that house for 8 months. He took everything from her. Me, my freedom, my honor, my connection to my family. The photograph he forced me to take wearing that white dress was the worst day. He wanted to pretend I was his wife, that I had chosen to be there, but I made sure to leave a message in that picture. I moved my fingers just so, a help signal I had read about in a book. I didn't know if anyone would ever see it, but I needed to try. I needed there to be some proof that I hadn't gone willingly." The records showed that Catherine helped Louisa contact her family through carefully secret messages to keep Whitfield from knowing. In May 1904, Louisa's mother, Martha, received a letter. "Mama, I am alive. I cannot tell you where I am, only that I am safe now and getting well. The man who held me believes I am dead. Please let him continue to believe that. It is the only way to keep you and father and my siblings safe. I will write again when I can. I love you, your daughter." Marcus found the final piece of the story in Atlanta newspaper archives from March 1904. A small article reported, "Fire at Whitfield residence claims life. Authorities report that a tragic fire took place at the home of important businessman Charles Whitfield last evening. One servant died in the blaze. Mr. Whitfield stated that the young Negro woman, whose name was not recorded, had been careless with a cooking fire. The body was too badly burned for identification. The incident is considered a tragic accident, but a black newspaper, the Atlanta Independent, told a different story in a carefully worded article. Sources within the Negro community report that the servant, who supposedly died in the recent fire at the Whitfield home, had in fact escaped weeks earlier. Several witnesses report seeing a young woman, matching her description, running from the property in February. The fire appears to have been purposefully set to hide the fact of H.E.R. escape and to scare other possible witnesses. Police have refused to investigate further. Louisa had escaped, and Whitfield had hidden it by claiming she died in a fire. He couldn't admit she had gotten away without revealing the truth of her capture. He had to keep up his public image, so he created a fake death and moved on. For the Johnson family, this meant they could never publicly say their daughter was alive without putting her in danger. Rebecca and Marcus found letters between Martha Johnson and Catherine Wells spanning years. Catherine had helped Louisa start a new life in Washington, D.C., using a new name. She found work as a seamstress and later trained as a nurse. She married a good man named Edward, a postal worker, in 1908. They had 4 children, But Louisa never returned to Atlanta, and her parents had to pretend their daughter was dead to protect her. Marcus discovered that Louisa kept the story alive in her own way. In 1925, she gave evidence to a commission looking into racial violence and misuse in the South. She didn't use her real name, but she told her story. "I was 19 when a white man took me from my family and held me prisoner for 8 months. He could do this because the law didn't protect people who looked like me. He knew no one would believe me if I spoke. He knew my family had no power to save me. But I survived, and I want my story on record so that someday when the world is ready to hear it, people will know what happened to women like me." Rebecca and Marcus spent 6 months gathering their research into a detailed historical document. They traced Louisa's descendants through Washington, D.C. records and found her great-granddaughter, a woman named Dr. Michelle Foster, who taught Black history at Howard University. When Rebecca called her, Michelle's reaction was immediate and deeply emotional. "We had been waiting for to find this story," she said. They met at Michelle's home, where she had carefully kept everything Louisa had left behind. "My great-grandmother lived until 1978, Michelle explained. "She was 94 years old, and she never forgot what happened in Atlanta. She told us the story when we were old enough to understand. She made us promise to keep it safe, to make sure it wasn't forgotten. She said, 'Someday, someone will find that photograph, and when they do, I want them to know the whole truth.'" Michelle showed them Louisa's personal papers, including a diary she kept in her later years. One entry read, "I have lived a good life despite what was done to me. I raised 4 beautiful children. I helped bring many babies into the world as a nurse. I loved and was loved, but I never forgot those 8 months, and I never forgot my parents' pain. That photograph exists somewhere with my silent cry frozen in it. I pray that one day someone will see it and understand. I pray that my story will help people recognize how many women suffered in silence, trapped by laws that took away our humanity in a society that refused to see our pain." The National Museum of African American History and Culture put together an exhibit called Silent Testimony, Louisa's Story, and the Hidden History of Jim Crow Captivity. The center of the exhibit was the 1903 photograph, shown alongside the photographer's diary, hospital records, family letters, and Louisa's own statement. The exhibit text was clear and direct. This photograph documents not a marriage, but a crime. It shows a young black woman being held prisoner by a white man who faced no punishment because the legal and social systems of Jim Crow America gave him complete protection. At the opening, Michelle stood before the photograph with tears running down her face. Next to the 1903 image was a photo of Louisa from 1960, age 76, sir. Rounded by children and grandchildren, her face calm and strong. "My great-grandmother survived," Michelle told the gathered crowd. "She not only survived, she rose above it. She turned her suffering into meaning, helping other women, raising a family, building a worthwhile life. This photograph no longer just shows her capture. It shows her resistance, her courage, and her refusal to be erased." Rebecca addressed the audience. For 120 years, Louisa's distress signal went unnoticed, but she left it there anyway, trusting that someday someone would look closely enough to see. Her story is not just about one woman's suffering. It's about the systematic abuse allowed by racist laws and social structures. It's about the countless black women who were similarly harmed with no way to fight back. And it's about the amazing strength of those who survived and built lives of dignity despite everything meant to destroy them. As thousands of visitors walked through the exhibit over the following months, they saw Louisa's hand signal, read her story, and understood the truth that had been hidden for over a century. The photograph had finally achieved its purpose, not as proof that could save Louisa in her own time, but as a testament that refused to let her story be forgotten. Her silent cry had finally been heard, and in being heard, it gave a voice to countless others whose stories had been buried by history's purposeful forgetfulness.